Let me send some quick show links for our two guests today before we get rocking and rolling. Shoot that over. Boom, boom. Let's get one more out, and we will be good to go. Show link. Let's get it rolling. There we go. All right, guys. Welcome to Mock 10 Sports in this January 15th, 2024 episode. It's freezing, absolutely freezing in most places across the Southeast. Grab a blanket. Come join us for this next hour. So this is going to be one of our better shows, I think. We got two phenomenal guests. We'll talk about that in just a minute. And I also know you're not doing anything because nobody is doing anything I know across the Southeast right now. Too cold to even go outside. Drives me nuts. Conversation for another day. At least usually like to get out, get some steps in, or run in. Can't do that. Way too cold. But what a week of sports. We had a national championship game just a week ago, and that feels like 5 years ago at this point. Nick Saban retired not too long after that. Alabama is now named Kalen DeBoer from Washington, their new head man at Bama. Travarius Robinson, a lot of people know him as T-Rob. He went to Georgia, came back and interviewed for the Alabama defensive coordinator job, and now he's back at Georgia, or he stayed at Georgia, I should say, and he will be co-DC. A lot of cooks in the kitchen there. Kirby Smart, Glenn Schumann, Travarius Robinson. And it sounds like Will Muschamp will be he's not demoted. He's moving to an analyst. I think it was to take on a little bit more of a personal role. So we'll see from that standpoint. And I didn't say personnel role, more of a personal role. I think he wants to be able to see his kids and stuff play a lot. So that's different. We got Texas A&M AD Ross Bjork looking like he's going to be going to Ohio State. So we'll see how that goes. Alabama wide receiver Isaiah Bond is committed to Texas. This is one of those classic things to me. Both things can be true at once. I think it's a big get for Texas and Steve Sarkisian. I also think it can be replaceable for Alabama. It's only a 750-yard receiver. I think they can replace him. Good player. I think it's a win-win for both. We'll also discuss what has been going on at Auburn with the staff changes. If you're an Auburn man there, you better watch out. Mizzou and Eli Drinkwitz, massive opportunity to keep the Mo going in 2024. We'll see how that goes from that standpoint. Then we have two, like I mentioned, fantastic guests tonight. ESPN's Chris Lowe, who broke the Nick Saban retirement news, Mr. SEC for ESPN. He'll join us at 7:15. Then Fox Sports Aaron Torres will join us to talk Kalen DeBoer. He lives out on the West Coast. He's familiar with Kalen DeBoer's time at Washington and Fresno State. We'll also talk some SEC hoops with Aaron as well. Speaking of SEC hoops, quite the slate on Saturday. We had numerous close games. We had two overtime games with Kentucky, Texas A&M, South Carolina, Missouri, and a game down to the wire, Alabama, Mississippi State. Great slate. We'll discuss. Then we'll also preview this upcoming week's matchup. Some games got pushed up time-wise due to the snow in the Southeast, specifically the Tennessee-Florida matchup tomorrow. But we'll discuss that. But let's get into it. Right before Chris Lowe joins us, let's get into it. Like I mentioned, Kalen DeBoer to Alabama, coming over from Washington. Previous stints, he's been the OC quarterbacks coach at Eastern Michigan, been the OC quarterbacks coach at Fresno State as well. Indiana offensive coordinator, quarterbacks coach in 2019. That was the original relationship with Michael Penix Jr. Remember that timeline. That was the relationship there. Fresno State, he was the head coach for 2 years. In Washington, he's been the head coach since 2022. Initial thoughts, guy is just a winner. He's a winner. 104-12 in 4 seasons as a head coach. Remember, 2 at Fresno State, 2 at Washington. But first, let's get the obvious out there. He is a fantastic offensive mind who is bringing in a great offensive mind, or multiple great offensive minds, specifically in Ben Grubb, who Nick Saban and Alabama initially went after last year when trying to replace Bill O'Brien. He said no, was loyal to DeBoer, wants to stay with him. So Alabama's essentially getting him back on the rebound. He didn't get a chance at the head coaching job. They hired Jed Fischel. He will be coming with Caleb DeBoer to Alabama. So it's a big get for Alabama. Kalen DeBoer bringing his offensive staff, it sounds like for the most part. Offensive line coach Scott Huff He coached the Joe Moore Award. If you don't know what the Joe Moore Award is, that is given to the best offensive line in the country. They won that. Wide receiver coach Marcus Shepard as well. He'll be coming over. Good offensive staff. Again, it's going to be about his defensive staff. Again, I don't think you can question the offensive scheme and player development. And the thing I don't really like when people say is, well, he can't fit in that system. It's a pass-heavy system. It's pass first. That's not true. They built their system around their personnel. If I had Michael Penix in a Romaduze, in two other NFL wide receivers, I would throw the rock around a lot too. They also had Mississippi State transfer Dylan Johnson, who had a good season. I'm just saying that they adjusted to their personnel. They built their scheme around that. They're not just a pass-heavy offense. Yeah, do they have some core values from that standpoint? But remember, it's a lot of rail routes from a pass scheme, a lot of mesh concepts. They really relate this to their personnel, and I think that's why they're so good. They're not just married to a specific system, which I think that's what the best coaches are built on. I worked for Gus Malzahn at UCF and Auburn. He's married to a system. He doesn't tweak it to the personnel. He doesn't. It is what it is. A lot of college coaches are like that. That's why the best coaches are in the NFL from a scheme standpoint. I don't know Kalen DeBoer. I've only heard fantastic things about him, about being a true people person. Again, that's rare to find. Everybody I called and checked in on and said, hey, great person, great culture guy, great people person. That's who he is. He's a genuine guy who cares about his staff and players. Fantastic guy to work for. I'm going to read a text right before Chris gets on here talking about a guy I trust in the industry. He's out in the Pac-12, chief of staff in a massive program, I guess, in the new Big Ten now. But they've seen Kalen DeBoer in Washington 3 times in the past 2 years. The guy I'm texting is one of Chris Peterson's right-hand guys, and that's one of Kalen DeBoer's biggest mentors. So it wouldn't be shocked if the guy I'm about to read a text, I'm not going to say his name, you could probably put the pieces together. Maybe got a call from Kalen DeBoer to go back to his alma mater at Alabama. I'll read it at the end. But Chris Peterson, speaking of a true pioneer of culture, that's where Kalen DeBoer gets it from. I've even heard some people be like, hey, the culture for the kids in the Southeast may be a little much. I don't really believe that, but he is a true people person, great offensive scheme, true culture guy. Those two things right there cannot be denied. You check both boxes. Kalen DeBoer checks both boxes. Easily checks both boxes for a great offensive scheme, developer, and then a true people person culture. People use the word culture so much, but you would be so shocked people have bad cultures. Culture is just a buzzword, but I truly think, remember, Chris Peterson was one of the pioneers, like I mentioned earlier, of culture within college football, starting back in his days at Boise State and certainly at Washington. They only offered about 72 people a year. You also had to be a good football player, but you also had to check out grade-wise and from a personality fit. Kalen DeBoer comes from that. He's the exact same way. Now, the key to his success, and I think a lot of people will be able to tell you this, I'm not breaking any news here, will be player acquisition. His ability to recruit high school kids, portal, and his retention from a current roster standpoint will be key. In my opinion, he's done 2 out of these 3 already. Now, it's a very small sample size, but the high school classes at Washington, the 23-24 classes weren't great. But that was a strategy of a place like Washington that is completely different than a place like the University of Alabama. I mean, again, not telling anything nobody knows. Washington isn't as committed to football as the University of Alabama is. Live in a big city like Seattle, academic institution, the higher-ups academic from people talking that have worked at Washington. They used to call it the Pac-12. They used to call it PAC, the acronym standing for Passive Aggressive Conference. It's different. It's different out there. The NIL dollar amount's different out there. It's not the same. So that's why they had to go the player retention route. And honestly, a guy like DeBoer probably preferred it that way. They paid their current kids on the roster to stay. At a place like Washington, you should do that, especially if you're going to embrace a culture and really be about that. In saying, from this standpoint, being able to recruit the high school routes, which he's going to have to do in the Southeast, and especially in a state like Alabama, saying he can't or hasn't had to yet are 2 completely different things. Let me repeat that. Saying he can't or hasn't had to yet are 2 completely different things. For example, just because, again, you probably can't see it right now because everything is littered with snow out there. Just because I don't have to rake leaves out in my front yard in the fall doesn't mean I can't. I just don't live in a house right now that has multiple trees in my front yard. When I inevitably move, I mean, if we choose a house with an abundance of trees in the front yard, I'll have to adjust and figure out ways to get the leaves out of my front yard. It's a very layman's term, simple concept. That's kind of how I feel. Just because he hasn't had to doesn't mean he can't. Very simple analogy, but I think it applies here. But at the same time, I think it can be asked, has Kalen DeBoer proven he can recruit at an elite high school level? Absolutely not. I don't think you could argue that unless you have the darkest of crimson colored glasses on out there. I don't think you can argue that. But I think the guy is a people person, and people gravitate towards him from people that have worked with him or been around people that have worked with him. At the end of the day, recruiting is sales. If you're a people person and care about people and you recruit with the best of them, you can recruit with the best of them, especially when you have that script A on your chest. Who's ever had that? Now, another thing to realize, he would need help from the collective. The money's there. Plus, I'm even hearing Nick Saban's going to take some money out of his Mercedes plants that he has and going to give that to, I guess, Yay, Alabama or the collective there. It will just need to be allocated correctly. It will have to be allocated correctly. And I think that's key to remember. Alabama has money, people. That ain't ever been the issue. But under Nick Saban, like I talked about last episode, Alabama didn't have to go throw a bunch of money at people like that. You kind of got the benefit from a brand standpoint that, hey, there's something to be able to play at the University of Alabama, the Bama, built by Bama, the Nick Saban way, the process. You got just as much out of it as Alabama did to some extent. Alabama can't say that anymore because it's not Nick Saban's Alabama. Right, wrong, or indifferent, it's not. It's going to have to be allocated correctly. Alabama has hired Courtney Morgan at the general manager position. And let's be the first to announce this is the first time Alabama's had this position. Let's call a spade here. The general manager since 2007 has been Nicholas Lou Saban. Let me repeat myself. The general manager since 2007 has been Nicholas Lou Saban. They've had DPPs, director of recruiting, whatever you want to call it. But Nick Saban managed and allocated that. Alabama will now need someone to allocate those finances and manage the roster for the first time in 17 years. Let that sink in. They're going to need that. Courtney Morgan's got a big job on his hand. He's got it. And from people talking to him, I hear he does a phenomenal job. A lot of people in the industry call him mouthpieces. He's a true relationship guy. And I think Courtney does a good job from that standpoint. But has he ever managed a roster like he will in the SEC at the University of Alabama? And you got to come in with a plan. Like, hey, how much am I going to pay my quarterback? Hey, how much am I going to pay this receiver? Hey, how much am I going to pay this defensive lineman? Hey, how much am I going to pay this corner? You got to allocate that. You got to have a plan. That's not just overnight we're putting this together. There's got to be a real game plan from that standpoint. I think that's the big question mark. Not saying it can't be done. I lean towards it can. If you really pulled my arm and made me say yes or no, I would lean towards, yeah, they probably get it done. But there could be a learning curve. There absolutely could be a learning curve. And I fully expect there to be a learning curve. Courtney standpoint. Courtney Morgan's got a big task on his hand. He's getting a lot of publicity through the media. Fine. He does a phenomenal job of building these relationships, like I mentioned. But it's totally different. Totally different than managing a roster at this level. Having kids in the cafeteria. I was talking to an SEC DPP today. He says he's got kids coming up to him while he's trying to get his meal for lunch at the cafeteria. Like, hey, coach, my buddy at Arkansas, for example, saying he's getting $80,000. Like, why am I not making that? My buddy at Texas saying he's making $120,000. You got to deal with that. You can be a relationship people person all you want, but that wears on you after a while. You got to have the patience. You got to have a game plan. All your ducks got to be in a row. Because one slide off, that could affect the locker room, which then carries out on the field. Big task at hand for Courtney Morgan. He's never had to do something like this. I think he can get it done. It could be a little bit of a learning curve. Overall, this was as good of a hire as you could have made, in my opinion. I mean, who else were you going to go hire out there? Let's be honest. Who else were you going to go hire that was a complete no-brainer? I mean, Steve Sarkisian, but how realistic was that? You essentially just got him an extension at Texas. He could have been better. But remember, Kalen DeBoer is 2-0 against him in the last 2 years. Beat him in the Alamo Bowl last year. Beat him in the Sugar Bowl in the semifinals. But there isn't some no-brainer like a Nick Saban or Kirby Smart out there. There isn't. Kalen DeBoer is a top 5 coach in college football. And I'll say he's the second best or third best in the SEC right now behind Kirby Smart. I think you're splitting Adams 2A, 2B with him and Sark. If you go the head-to-head, I know it's a small sample size, but DeBoer's 2-0 in the last 2 years against him. I think there's an easy case he's second or third in the SEC. With all that being said, he does come with some question marks, but there isn't a candidate out there that Greg Byrne in Alabama could have hired that didn't have some concerns. Why can't two things be true at once? I think we struggle with that as a society sometimes. It's a great hire, but yeah, there's some question marks. I think player acquisition would be one of those. But again, fantastic hire, tip of the cap to Greg Byrne, getting it done. But again, it could be a learning curve for DeBoer and a guy like Courtney Morgan from a player acquisition standpoint. Let's don't be rushing to judgments initially from this standpoint, but I think it should be just something to keep an eye on, just something to keep an eye on. But let's get my guy in here, Chris Lowe. There he is. What's up, Chris? ESPN's Chris Lowe joining us on the show tonight. He joined us the week of the SEC championship game, if I remember correctly. Chris was the one to break the news that Coach Saban was retiring. Chris, thanks for joining the show, man. How we doing tonight?
Thank you for having me. Doing great. Just snowed in here in Tennessee.
Shoot, aren't we all here? And I saw they pushed up the Tennessee basketball game tomorrow.
Yeah, it's when I was younger, I'm not from Tennessee, but when I was in school here, we used to get a ton of snow, and really don't get as much anymore. But tonight, yeah, we're 7, 8, 9 inches already.
So it's rough out there. See, I'm in Oxford right now. It's getting a little higher. It's not that. I'll say that. But Chris, you broke the news of Nick Saban's retirement. What was your initial reaction when you were on the phone with him and he was telling you? Was it his like 11th hour decision? It's being portrayed?
Well, no. I mean, Nick Saban doesn't do anything 11th hour. I mean,
yeah.
I think most of the people that know him know that. This is something he had been thinking about. He and his wife Terry had talked about this when they went away after the season down to their place in Florida. And he sort of went through a similar process last year, maybe even a couple years. When you get 70, making sure that you do what's right for you and your family. And I think was the same way with his process. And there were some people I think that knew that this is certainly a possibility. I don't think anybody wanted to come to grips with it in and around the Alabama program. But when he got back into town on Monday night, I think he knew which way he was probably going to go. And I know he has said, and other people have sort of suggested that he didn't know right up until 5 or 10 minutes. See, I think that's more – anytime any of us have a big decision in life that we're making, a life-changing type of deal, even for a guy like Saban, there's some butterflies, there's some nerves. Hey, am I really going to do this? Am I going to go through with this? And I think that's probably what he was feeling, knowing the impact that his stepping down would have on a ton of people, not just the players or the program, but a lot of people who are connected to that program, whether it's people that work inside the building, people that had been on his staff, and just really, I think for a guy who has done it at such a high level for a long time, what's his life going to be like without football?
And it's funny. It brings me to my next question. You teed it up. You put it on a softball. If you had to guess, I saw Vegas came out with odds. They had like the 6 highest odds. He would be on tour with the Rolling Stones here. So what is Nick Saban doing within the next 2 or 3 years, in your opinion? I know he's going to be around right now, but do you see anything else for him in the future?
Yeah, I think Nick's more of an Eagles guy than he is a Stones guy. I can tell you that. He's going to be around. He wants to be a resource for the university in a lot of different ways. He does not want to be, though, the GM of the football team. I've heard people say, well, he's got an office there. He's going to be around. No, he's got an office in the stadium. They're going to construct him an office there in Bryant-Denny Stadium. If you've been on campus, that stadium's, I don't know, a half mile maybe away from the football building. So he's not going to be out and about in football, poking his head in meetings. That's not what he wants to do. He wants to be a resource. He wants to be there when people need him for the entire university, not just football program. And listen, there's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears in that program that he put in.
Yeah.
And he does not want to see that team or that program, start to dip and take on water. So he's going to be there for everybody. Now, he's going to stay busy, probably play a little bit more golf. I think you will see him on TV. I think he loves doing TV. He's good at it. That's something that I think you're going to, whatever network it's on, he's going to, I think, dabble in that. I think you'll see Nick at some point be a voice for change, for uniformity, whatever you want to call it in college football, to sort of keep things from being as chaotic as they are right now across the board, and sort of being that voice to bring some reasonable reform for students, for coaches, for teams, just for the sport, to try to get it to where it's not just what we see now and it's just comings and goings, and not just players. I mean, coaches too. I mean, coaches, the money that's involved now for college coaches, and you saw what happened this week. Nick Saban retires. Kalen DeBoer goes from Washington to Alabama. Jed Fish goes from Arizona to Washington. Two teams that, one was in the championship game this year. The other, Arizona, was probably going to be the favorite with 16, 17 guys coming back, starters, and they're moved to the Big 12. And now both those programs starting over with new coaches and new players, guys leaving. So it's a tough world now for a lot of people. And I think at some point Saban would love to be that guy, whatever it is. If there's a commissioner at some point in college football, he'd be great at that, and I think he'd be interested in that.
No, I think he'd be phenomenal. I mean, I think I could see him almost winning that unanimously if people had to vote on that. But transitioning to the new era, it's the Kalen DeBoer era. What's some thoughts from Chris Lowe, some thoughts, concerns? You think the biggest hurdle that DeBoer is going to have to get over in his first year in Tuscaloosa?
Not losing a game. I mean, I'm being facetious, obviously, but the first time he loses, they played Georgia in September.
It's the first SEC game.
Kirby and the Dogs come in there and win in Tuscaloosa. What do you think the narrative is going to be? And I'm being, as I said, just sort of joking around, but Kalen doesn't walk in with his eyes closed. He understands what the expectations are there.
Yeah.
When you follow a guy like Saban, and you're going to have thick skin. You're going to have to keep your eyes on what your vision and what your plan is, and not worry about what I say or what fans say or you or anybody else in the media, donors, boosters. You got to do it your way. You got to be who you are. And I think, I don't know Kalen DeBoer very well, but certainly I know people who do, and he's very secure in his own skin. He's a very down-to-earth, realistic guy. He's very much in touch with reality. I think in this day and age of football, he understands what it means to relate to kids, how to coach them, how to get them to buy in, even though you are fighting that battle constantly in the locker room where some guys are making more money than others, and kids that are 18, 19, 20, and I probably wouldn't have been any different, are bragging about how much money they're making. Sometimes they're embellishing those figures. But how do you manage that situation? And I think Kalen is one of those guys, again, who is real enough with his kids and understands how to manage that. And despite all that, despite this new era we're in of the NIL portal, has the ability to get his kids to buy in and really invest in what they're trying to do.
Yeah, because that's some of the things I'd heard from people that had worked for him, or some people that had talked to some people that had been close with him. The culture is real, and everybody loves working for the guy. And I think offensive scheme and development is going to be there. It's like you said, it's going to be managing. I think that roster, you probably heard me right before you got on. But talking about player acquisition, retention, we had a little issue with Tavarius Robinson. Could he potentially keep some of these guys on the Alabama defensive side of the ball? He is going back to Georgia. You have any intel on how that kind of went down? What was the back and forth conversation since Friday when Kalen DeBoer got into Tuscaloosa?
Well, it happened sort of fast. He gets in Friday night, and already, everybody on that staff, as well as players, are being picked, and quote unquote, you can't tamper with players. We all know that's a bunch of BS.
Yeah.
That happens all the time. But the same with coaches. Now, coaches, there's no tampering rule. So if you're Tavarius Robinson or whoever on that staff, and Kirby Smart calls you and says, "Hey man, we want you to come right now. We got an opening. Will Muschamp is transitioning over to an off-field role. We want to hire you right now." Well, that happened on, I think, Saturday. Kalen gets in on Friday. So it was pretty much of a whirlwind. But I think as Kalen started to really sort of survey everything and figure out who were the lifeline type coaches and staff members on that team, then Tavarius is certainly one of those guys that the kids on that team, the players, trusted, wanted to be around. He made a hard pitch. He came back on campus. They talked for a while. about him being Kalen's defensive coordinator. I think at the end of the day, Travaris just felt like, you know what, he was better off going back to Georgia, staying there, see what happens. Glenn Schumann's the guy that's the primary play caller at Georgia, but he's going to be in demand too. In the next year or two, I will assure you that Schumann's probably going to be a head coach somewhere. Someone's going to come get him, much like Oregon came and got Dan Lanning. If that's the case, then there's that job wide open for Travaris Robinson to be the defensive coordinator at Georgia, or possibly get a head job based on his experience. So there's not been a lot of time for Kalen DeBoer to put a lot of this together. I think there is a little bit of a scramble drill going on. He's bringing most of his guys from Washington. He is going to keep Gillespie as his running back coach, Freddie Roach as his defensive line coach. And I think you'll see other key guys in and around Alabama that he keeps. A guy like Ellis Ponder, who's been operations director there for a long time. Jeff Allen, who's been invaluable as Nick Saban's trainer for all 17 years. I got to think that those guys will stay a part of that program because they're so much a part of the soul of that program, have been for 10-plus years.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if he keeps Coach Ballou, the strength and conditioning coach. I know they had a cross paths at Indiana when DeBoer was the OC over there, so that'll be interesting from that standpoint, some of the recruiting staff. So, yeah, you're right. That'll be interesting. Transition in before Chris again with ESPN's Chris Lowe here. Chris is the man. Anything college football breaking news, especially from an ESPN standpoint, this is our guy. Again, Chris, appreciate you joining us. Two other teams wanted to briefly talk about before we get you out of here. Anything you're hearing on the LSU offensive coordinator hire? Tommy Rees, a name to kind of keep an eye on? Does he get back together with his old coach Brian Kelly? Any names, candidates there?
Yeah, Tommy Rees is a guy I think is going to have a lot of opportunities. You hear him there, maybe Ohio State, possibly. I think he's going to have some NFL opportunities. I had a chance to correspond with Tommy earlier today, and he's disappointing. He only had 1 year with Nick Saban. He learned a lot. He's only 31 years old. And I think to have that opportunity to learn under a guy like Nick Saban and to be such a big part of what was a special season. I know they didn't win the national championship. They did win an SEC title. They beat a Georgia team that hadn't lost in almost 3 years. And where that offense started to where it ended, where Jalen Milroe started to where he ended, most of that credit, a huge chunk of that credit goes to Tommy Rees, for hanging in there, pushing the right buttons, bringing along Jalen Milroe, and the entire offensive staff, the way they were able to sort of get the most out of that team. So he's going to have opportunities. It was hard for him to leave his alma mater. I know to come to Alabama. Remember, he had a shot to go with Brian Kelly the first time when Kelly went to LSU. He didn't. He stayed. He gets another shot to leave and go to a blue blood program. This time he makes the decision to come, and Nick Saban retires. So a little bit of a tough break for Tommy. But listen, everybody around college football knows what kind of job he did, so he will have opportunities. And I think he'll have enough, Dave, where he'll have a chance to choose what's best for him.
And then from Auburn, going across the state, we talked to Alabama a lot. We talked to LSU. Auburn, Hugh Freeze, looks like he's kind of revamping some things. Zach Etheridge gone, Cadillac Williams gone. Looks like he's bringing back Crime Dog, Wesley McGriff. What's some staff shakeup over there you're hearing over on the Plains?
Well, I think Hugh's trying to take his time and see what, with the guys that he feels like he needs. He's going to have some more recruiters. He plans on calling his own plays next year. Now, would that change depending on if he got someone else in there as offensive coordinator? It's hard to call your own plays now as a head coach. Very few people do that because of all the demands and all the different hats you have to wear now as a head coach. With NIL, re-recruiting your own players. June used to be a month that you could take some time off. Well, now June is filled with portal guys and not even portal guys, but recruits coming in for visits, and you got to be there. So the calendar right now, and no one feels sorry for coaches because they make millions of dollars, but it's just hard to do everything and have your hands on every single thing, especially when you have to call your own plays. I know that's something Hugh wants to do. I think he feels like his teams are at their best, and he's been at his best when he's been able to call his own plays because he's one of the better play callers in college football. So that certainly is a plan. He wants to do it. That doesn't mean that won't change if you get someone in there. But I think you're right. I think having guys in there, because he was a very good recruiter too, but guys who understand the SEC, have recruited in the SEC, have coached in the SEC, will be very important for him now as he moves forward.
ESPN's Chris Lowe. Chris, I know you're a busy man. You don't have to take the time to jump on with us, but I do appreciate the 15, 20 minutes you gave us, brother.
It's good to be with you guys. Always good to talk football, Dave, and I appreciate you having me.
Hey, no problem. Appreciate you, brother. Look forward to having you on again. All right, guys. Chris Lowe, he is the man with a plan from that standpoint. Appreciate him joining us. He broke the news. He broke the news that Nick Saban was retiring. There's no one better out there from that standpoint. There's absolutely no one better from a breaking news overall standpoint. But I promised you, I was going to read you that text message from someone who had seen, I was texting this morning, that has seen Kalen DeBoer up close 3 times this year. I'm giving you the math here, people. If you take the time to look it up, you can probably figure out who this is from. I'm going to read you what they thought. It's a rival in the former Pac-12. It's a new Big Ten school when it comes to football. They played Kalen DeBoer in Washington the last 3 years. This guy's worked at Washington, has a real connection with Chris Peterson, who is Kalen DeBoer's mentor in the sport. This is what he said. I think he's a good culture builder with a great offensive coordinator, offensive line coach, and a veteran team. They didn't sign a soul at Washington while he was there, but kept all his vets from leaving and kept all his good players out of the portal. Do think he was smart because they used all the NIL money to get guys to come back to school. Wonder how good of a mouthpiece you need to sign at players in Alabama this day and age. He's talking about the roster management kind of deal like that. Like I said, the Courtney Morgan hire, that will be critical. I don't think Lane or Jimbo worked very hard at it. He's talking about in recruiting and still signed good players. It was a good hire. Do think it could be an interesting fit because the culture is definitely something that can be over the top if you haven't been through it. So again, checks everything we talked about. True culture guy. It's not a fake culture. Now, they'll do some team constructive organization activities from a culture standpoint. It'll be something a lot of people in the Southeast aren't used to. The culture and a true people person, culture will be fine. Development overall from an offensive standpoint, offensive scheme, he's bringing his whole Washington staff. They're dudes. They're dudes from a scheme standpoint, development standpoint. From just a football coach standpoint, top 5 in the country, definitely, easily, for sure. Question again, we talked about it. Chris Lowe joined us. Talent player acquisition will be key. Because remember, there's only been one general manager for the past 17 years at the University of Alabama, and that is Nicholas Lou Saban. It could be a big adjustment. It's going to be a big adjustment. Roster management, being on the same page from a understanding of how money is allocated to these prospects now is one of the more important things you could have. It's unbelievably important. You have to have someone there managing the roster, dealing with those personalities, like a salary cap guy, and like I keep saying, a roster management guy. This is different than NIL. There's name, image, likeness is how kind of Livy Dunn, the female gymnastics player, or the basketball player, the female basketball player in Iowa, they're making their name off true name, image, likeness. Your value as a player within an organization is different. It's under the umbrella name, image, likeness, but it's pay for play. We're calling 2 different things here, people. Calling 2 different things. But again, appreciate Chris Lowe joining us. Just want to get back to that text message I promised you from someone I trust earlier that's very familiar with Kalen DeBoer. We'll have Aaron Torres joining us in about 10 minutes to talk DeBoer, talk some SEC hoops. But before that, I promise you, what is going on at Auburn? Chris alluded to it a little bit. Running back coach Cadillac Williams and DB's coach Zach Etheridge are both gone. Both gone. I thought maybe wide receiver coach Marcus Davis could potentially be gone as well. Some of the forced hires on Hugh Freeze. Word is he went to the president, went to the AD, or he probably went to the AD, John Cohen, and then their president, I forget Auburn's president's name. He went to them and said, hey, I got to do it my way. He went full Frank Sinatra. He wants to do it his way. I don't blame him. But apparently there was some riffraff between him. Remember, Cadillac Williams thought he was going to get that job. From talking to people in the building, Cadillac was a little bit of an issue. So if you're an Auburn fan, I know he was probably your favorite player growing up. If you're my age, again, I like Cadillac. I like Cornell. Great player. I think there were some disgruntlement, some resentment going on from his standpoint. DB's coach Zach Etheridge moved on to Houston. Put 2 and 2 together, guys. You're not leaving your alma mater where you're a position coach to go be a position coach at Houston. That's not happening. So put 2 and 2 together from that standpoint. Had to keep Marcus Davis because they recruited very well at the wide receiver position. Recruited very well. But Hugh Freeze, I'm also hearing, is hiring a general manager. He needs to hire one too. What have I been saying? What have I been saying this whole episode? What has been the theme? That role is so important. And from talking to people at Auburn, Auburn's got the money too, like Alabama. There doesn't seem to be a strategy. Hugh Freeze needs somebody who can come in and tell him exactly, hey, this is how much we're paying this offensive line transfer portal guy. I've heard they've lost some guys out in the transfer portal at the offensive line position because they didn't have their ducks in a row from an NIL standpoint. The teams they were competing against, hey, actually had a hard dollar amount. It is what it is. People may not like to hear that, but that's what it is. You have to be prepared to have those conversations with these kids and parents. Come on your campus. Auburn's a bit behind from that standpoint, from a strategy standpoint. They have the money. They have the funds. You got to allocate it. Hugh Freeze can't be doing deals by himself. Just like Mike Elko at A&M, from what I hear, trying to do deals by himself. You're the head coach. You heard Chris Lowe mention it. Chris Lowe mentioned it. Didn't even tee it up for him there. Didn't even tee it up for Chris Lowe, and he mentioned it. There's not many guys who are successful calling their own plays that are head coaches. There's probably not many guys who are salary cap guys who can manage a roster and also manage 130 players plus staff and support staff as well. That's a lot. You need someone to hire that you trust to do that from an evaluation of the player on and off the field and put a dollar amount on that position. You have to have a structured plan. And I promise you I would have the NIL plan today for you. But again, a lot of stuff came up. I was not expecting all this to go down. I have it prepared. It should be on Thursday's episode. I'm going to put it on Thursday's episode. But again, Auburn, sounds like Hugh Freeze put his foot down a little bit and said, hey, you know what? I'm not just hiring within the Auburn family. You're not telling me who I'm hiring. Cadillac's going to go do his own thing. Zach Etheridge is going to Houston. I mean, normally every Auburn staff has some former player involved in it. It's just how they are. And he also needs a general manager, and he's aware of that. He's talked to some people. So Hugh Freeze, after the first year, again, they underachieved. He's even said he's underachieved. He even said he underachieved. So from that standpoint, Hugh Freeze going to have to make some hires. Wesley Crime McGriff, who was the secondary coach for him this past year, had a little riffraff with Ron Roberts. He went to A&M. He's now back. Remember, Ron Roberts went to go be the co-DC at Florida with Austin Armstrong. So a lot going on at Auburn. That's why I asked Chris that. But a lot going on. They got to figure out that GM role. Figure out a lot of positions, really, at Auburn. A lot going on with you. Big staff shakeup over there at Auburn. And then before Aaron Torres joins us in about 7 minutes, Missouri. Real opportunity. I was just thinking about it. I was driving to Atlanta on Friday. And I was thinking, what am I going to talk about on Monday besides obviously the obvious, Kalen DeBoer going to Alabama. But Missouri is a real opportunity in 2024, in my opinion. Brady Cook is back. Their Burden is back. They obviously got to replace their defensive coordinator, Blake Baker, who's moved on to LSU. And they all obviously got to replace Cody Schrader, who led the SEC in rushing this year. But they also have a running back I kind of like. From Georgia State, running back Marcus Carroll. He was top 10 in rushing in the country. I think he'll be fine. They got him out of the portal. NIL set up really well in the state of Missouri. Another year to back up an 11-win season that they had this year as the Cotton Bowl champs, beating Ohio State. Granted, a lesser Ohio State, but hey, it is what it is. You're an 11-2 Cotton Bowl team, best season Missouri's had since 2013. Similar year they won the Cotton Bowl, but they need to use this as a springboard. Everybody, Nick Saban used to say it all the time, anyone can go climb the mountaintop once. It's that sustainability. Can you be there? Eli Drinkwitz and this Missouri staff, I'm not saying they are. I'm just saying they don't need to take this offseason lightly. They don't need to just be drinking the Kool-Aid, hanging out on the beach, just kind of feeling themselves. You need to build off this. NIL, everything is broke your way in the past year at Missouri. You really didn't have any injuries last year. That doesn't happen. I was going back and looking, and They had no injuries on the offensive line. They probably were the only team in the league that had that happen. You had injury luck, and you need injury luck to have a great season. That's not like, oh, Eli Drinkwitz and them don't know what they're doing. It's so lucky. It's not that. My point being, a lot of things broke your way this year. You had 2 close losses to Georgia. Yeah, I mean, they kind of pulled away, but they played Georgia well in Athens. And a close loss to LSU. You got to take advantage of it. And also, let's pull up the schedule real fast. I want to pull up the schedule for the Missouri Tigers. It's a very manageable schedule. It's a very manageable schedule, courtesy of our guys over there, FBS schedules, kind of like the setup there. Murray State, fighting Jody Wright in his first game. That should be a win for Missouri. Buffalo should be a win. Boston College at home should be a win. Vanderbilt, win. That's 4-0 heading into your bye week. Then you're heading into a first-year coach, Mike Elko, at Texas A&M, your former Big 12 rival. That's a winnable game, man. It's a winnable game. At UMass, random game there, going up to Amherst. That's a win. So in your first 6 games, you should be 5-1. Let's call a spade. Your first 6 games, you should be 5-1. Easily. Your first 6 games, you should be 5-1. You get Auburn at home. If Auburn's rolling with Peyton Thorne again, anything's possible. I've been telling people on social media, Auburn, you talk to Auburn, Auburn's rolling with Peyton Thorne, people. Auburn is rolling with Peyton Thorne. They're rolling with Peyton Thorne. No offense about that. I think there's a ceiling to that. Let's go back to the schedule here. Sorry. At Alabama. It's a tough one, obviously. New staff, though. Again, they didn't expect that last week, that it would be a Nick Saban-less Alabama team. But, all right, at Alabama, tough game. Either way, there's a new staff. It's not as bad as it probably looked. Bye week. Oklahoma at home. Former Big 12 rival. At South Carolina. Eli Drinkwitz has never lost to South Carolina. At Mississippi State. First year Jeff Lebby, Mississippi State team. If there was a time to get them, it's this year. And then Arkansas. A year where Sam Pittman's probably going in the hot seat. Bobby Petrino's on his heels, probably trying to get that job. Who knows what Arkansas is like at that point in the season? The battle line rivalry they're telling me here on FBS schedules. What is Arkansas like? I mean, they may have tanked it in. Missouri should have – Missouri's a legit playoff contender off who they have back from an offensive standpoint and their schedule. That is not a bad schedule. I'm telling you, Murray State, Buffalo, Boston College, Vanderbilt, bye week, at Texas A&M, at UMass, Auburn, at Alabama, bye, Oklahoma at home, at South Carolina, and at Mississippi State. And then Arkansas. Then who knows? Maybe they finish in the top 2. Remember, there's no divisions next year in the SEC. I get a lot of text messages sometimes from people being like, they're going to compete for the West next year. Usually Ole Miss fans tell me that. I promise you, Ole Miss is not competing for the SEC West next year. A little off topic, but I promise you, Ole Miss, just like Missouri is not competing for the SEC East next year. Hell, Georgia's not competing for the SEC East next year. There's no East, there's no West, people. It's 1 and 2. Some people argue that third spot in the SEC next year could be the spot to be in. That could be the spot to be in, according to some. But man, boy, I was just thinking about Missouri, like I mentioned, on the way home the other day, or driving to Atlanta to my in-laws, and it's kind of crazy. I was just like, man, Missouri, great year this year. I'm like, they have a real chance to springboard. Because I remember looking at the schedule, the 2024 schedule, and being like, that's not that tough. That's not that bad. Just like Auburn's isn't bad. There were a handful of teams. It's all relative. There were a handful of teams that had very manageable, quote unquote, SEC schedules. And I thought Missouri was one of them. I did. I thought Missouri is one of them. I mean, you have Florida, who's playing the big 3 in their state, and they get the SEC schedule, and they got to go at Texas in that included as well. Again, it's all relative. But Missouri, and if you're Eli Drinkwitz, you have to capitalize on this opportunity. Anyone can go do something once. A lot of one-hit wonders out there. Like what was the band that did the Final Countdown? Europe. I don't know why that just came to my mind. A lot of one-hit wonders out there in sports and in life in general. They don't need to be drinking the Kool-Aid this offseason. Again, not saying they are. Missouri fans, don't panic. I'm just saying a massive opportunity with 2 new entries into this SEC in Oklahoma and Texas, obviously. Massive, massive opportunity for Eli Drinkwitz and Missouri to go use what they did this past year and take it to the next level. Have a chance to maybe get into the first 12-team playoff next year. Just want to bring that up. Aaron Torres from Fox Sports should be joining us any moment. Again, he's going to come in. Obviously, talk the obvious. Kalen DeBoer. Aaron's been on the West Coast, Pac-12 country. I believe he lives in Pasadena. So he's seen it up close and personal. Want to get his insight on what he thinks on Kalen DeBoer, how that transition to Tuscaloosa in the SEC at Alabama will be. Also talk a little SEC basketball. I'm going to ask him who he likes in the SEC this year in basketball, who he doesn't like, just thoughts in general. Is it over for Arkansas? You heard me. We'll talk basketball here in just a minute. I said I'm done with the Razorbacks. They're done. You watch any of their games, there's no effort. It's not a talent thing. There's no effort. There's guys, transition D, not even trying. Guys aren't getting on the floor for loose balls. They've lost by double digits in all 3 of their conference games this year. Auburn did whatever the heck they wanted to them. Whatever the heck they wanted to them in Bud Walton Arena. The worst loss in Bud Walton Arena history. I know it's not called Bud Walton Arena, but it is to me. So we're going to stay with there. 10-point loss on the road to Georgia. And then they lost to Florida big time. So about to tell Aaron, ready to rock and roll, and let him know. Perfect. Till he gets here, let's talk a little basketball. We'll get into some net rankings here first. Well, firstly, you know what? Let's do some SEC standings. Look at the SEC standings after 3 games here in the 23-24 SEC basketball season. Here it is. So we got the only 2 undefeated teams. They're both from the Yellowhammer State. Auburn sitting there at 3-0. Alabama sitting there at 3-0 as well. Ole Miss coming in at 2-1. Oh, here's Aaron. Let's stop sharing this and let's get him on right here. Aaron, AT, baby, what up?
Not much, man. How you doing?
Doing well, man. It's Aaron Torres from Fox Sports joining us. We talked about it at the beginning of the show. He's going to be joining us here. Aaron, right off the bat, I'm going to give it to you, man. What were your initial thoughts with the Kalen DeBoer hire at Alabama? You've seen him up close and personal. I was telling the audience, you're out there at Pasadena, correct?
Yeah. I mean, we don't have to give out my personal address, but yeah, no, I live in Pasadena, not far from the Rose Bowl. Yeah, no. So I live in Pac-12 country. So, and I'm obviously curious for your perspective as well. I think amongst the realistic candidates, I think he's about as good as Alabama could do. I don't think Sark was leaving Texas. And, oh, by the way, DeBoer was 2-0 against Sark. I think the $20 million buyout for Dan Lanning kind of made it non-negotiable there. So even if you like Dan Lanning, who, by the way, is 0-3 against DeBoer, he wasn't probably realistic. Dabo probably was not of interest to the fan base, et cetera, et cetera. And Lane Kiffin, and maybe you have some insight that I don't, David, I'm not totally sure why, but it did not feel like he was a legitimate candidate this entire process. Yeah. And so when you're talking about a guy that went 25-3 at the Power 5 level, has won everywhere he's gone. And all I would say is 2 things. Is I get the concerns about recruiting in the Southeast, about, putting together a staff in the Southeast. And I get that there have been a lot of people that have not been able to figure out that side of things. Brian Harsin is the one that everybody seems to point out, Brett Bielema, et cetera. But then there's also the Urban Meyers, the Nick Saban when he got to LSU that had no real ties to the SEC that figured it out. And so I like the hire. I think the thing that stands out to me about DeBoer, watching him over the last 2-3 years, and really even back to the Fresno days, is that he is not this is my system, this is the way we do things guy. He is, a guy that is going to adapt to the personnel that he has in the building. I thought he did a good job of that both in the regular season, in the Pac-12 championship game, and certainly against Texas in the college football playoff semifinal. And I don't think he's got a big enough ego where he walked into that room and told Alabama's players how it's going to be, because, of course, those guys all just are coming off an SEC championship run, and they've had success in their own right. So I like the hire. I sort of understand Alabama fans' concerns but I think every fan base, any fan base is no hire is going to be 100% universally lauded. But again, I think considering the guys that were realistic, I think he's about as good as you could have done. And I think the press conference on Saturday afternoon, I thought he handled about as well as you possibly could.
No, I agree with you. We talked about it at the opening of the show. There was no Nick Saban or Kirby Smart sitting out there. That was a no-brainer hire like it was for Georgia in 2016. Everyone has some, I don't want to say holes in the resume, but question marks that need to be answered. But you could say that about a lot of things. I'm with you. That's as good as a hire. I would say he's a top 5 coach in college football.
I agree.
I would legitimately say that.
Yeah, no, and that was my thought coming out of the season is like when we all do our offseason rankings of everything to just get through the offseason, he's going to be in like that top 5. But I get it's different being in the top 5 in the Pacific Northwest, Washington entering the Big Ten, as opposed to being at, one of the 2 to 3 best jobs with certainly the 2 to 3 highest expectations of anywhere in the sport. So I think he is an excellent coach. He's won everywhere he's gone. I think the other thing too, that I value, and maybe not everybody does, like you went at the NAIA level with the resources that you have there. It's not an exaggeration. Like he had one full-time head coach when he was at Sioux Falls, which I believe was Ryan Grubb, who's of course now his offensive coordinator. So I just bring it up because if you can win in a place with probably no recruiting budget, you got a bunch of guys on your roster that are going to be working at Enterprise Rental Car the day that they graduate. You don't have full-time assistants. Like if you can figure it out at that level, and you've done it at the Power 5 level too. It's not like you're going from D2 NAIA to Alabama. There's been steps along the way. You've figured it out at every step, and I believe he's going to be really successful.
No, I agree. Just one of your 2 cents on that. I know you're in Pac-12 country. We're not giving away the OAT address. I know you saw him up close and personal, so I just wanted to see what your thoughts overall from him going to the Southeast SEC country. But let's transition to the hardwood. I feel like you're an encyclopedia of college basketball, so I'm fired up here. What's your initial thoughts? We're 3 games into conference play. What is your initial thoughts on the SEC basketball season so far?
So my biggest take on the SEC is I think it's a metaphor for where we are in college basketball. And I put this out on social media on Saturday. Some people thought it was interesting. Other people, like everything on social media, thought I'm an idiot and I'm the dumbest person that's ever walked the face of the earth. And how could you ever say this? I think this is the first year that we are seeing NIL, the portal too, but really NIL, I think has completely flattened all of college basketball. And I think the SEC is the best example of this, is that you look at Tennessee, which came into Saturday as a top 5 team. They're going to Georgia, which is a historic doormat. Georgia was on an 11-game win streak, probably should have won that game. And right now, Mike White has them in position to make the NCAA tournament this year. And so why I bring it up is listen, we've had NIL for a few summers, but listen, that first summer, nobody really knew what NIL was. And then the second summer, it was like everybody's trying to figure out what is a collective, what can they do, what can't they do. And this past summer was the first summer where it was like, okay, NIL in its current form is here. It's not going anywhere. And so you combine that with the resources that SEC schools have, with the want of players to play right away, and that's their prerogative, et cetera. I just think that's the new world of college basketball, where I really look at it, and I don't think there's a difference between – I don't think there's much of a difference, especially when you're factoring in home courts, between team like 6 nationally and like 40 nationally. And that sounds crazy, but it's like, again, Tennessee went on the road, lost at Mississippi State, went on the road, probably should have lost to Georgia. Purdue last week in the Big Ten went on the road, lost to Nebraska. Whatever, fill in the blank. Duke has lost at Georgia Tech. I'm just trying to think off the top of my head some of these other teams. And I just think that's where we are in college basketball, is I think because of the portal, but then also because of NIL, it's like everybody just has dudes now. And especially when you're factoring in the home court. Again, I was watching Houston TCU at the same time as one of these SEC games. And it's like TCU was picked to finish 8th or 9th in that league. Houston was number 2 in the country. There really wasn't that much difference, especially when you factored in home court. So that's where I think we are. And I think it leads to a situation right now where I watch the SEC and it feels like on any given night, I think there's 14 teams out of the 16 that if you don't show up ready to play, they can beat you. Now, Vanderbilt's not very good, and I hate to say it, but Arkansas is not very good right now, a school that I saw earlier this year beat Duke. But other than that, again, Mississippi State's already beaten Tennessee. Georgia should have beaten Tennessee. Florida struggled against
Kentucky.
Yeah, they should have beat Kentucky. Ole Miss, which, just perfect example. LSU finished in last place in the SEC last year. They already have 2 wins in league play, excuse me. Ole Miss finished 3-15 in league play. They already have 2 SEC wins. They're 15-1 overall. I just think this is the new world. And I think, again, I think it's in other conferences too, but I think the SEC, the SEC is as good of a metaphor as anybody for this new world of hoops that we live in.
No, I like that. So speaking of Arkansas, I was going to bring this up on the last. You brought up Arkansas. You were there. You were at the Duke game that they won.
I was, yeah.
What is it? Do you see them getting the trains back on the track? The train get back on the track, or do you think it's too late? What do you see when you watch Arkansas right now?
I've known Coach Muss pre-Arkansas, and he's always figured out a way in the season. If he didn't have the horses, some years he just has the horses, but even in the years where he hasn't had the horses, he's always figured out a way. I just think this group is tough because it's kind of a worst case scenario where you have the guys that came back haven't really developed the way that you expected. Devo Davis, who's been part of this incredible run, 2 Elite Eights, 3 Sweet 16s in his career. He's a senior. He hasn't developed. Not only is he not developed, he was suspended because he was late to a team meeting or something. I mean, he didn't start the Auburn game to open SEC play because he was late. And so you have that kind of combination with, I think some guys aren't as far along as they thought. I think there are some transfers that haven't quite lived up to expectations. And I just don't know right now that the pieces fit. Now, the one thing I will say, I think Eric Musselman historically has been as good as anybody at figuring out, okay, this isn't working, but kind of continuing to tinker to figure things out and figure out how to get, again, to use the term you use, Dave, the train back on track, the train back on the tracks. And maybe he will, but I just don't think, I think they're sitting at 9-6, 9-7 overall right now or something like that. And you go back to 2 seasons ago, the 2022 season, they started 0-3 in league play and ended up finishing 3rd in the conference at something like 13-5 overall or something like that. I just don't think the combination of the guys he has on this roster, and again, to the point that we just discussed, the number of good teams in this league, I just don't think anybody, whether it's Kentucky, Tennessee, Texas A&M, whoever, I just don't think you're going to be able to rip off 10 of 11, 10 of 12, 9 of 11, 9 of whatever. It's just going to be too hard in this league this year. And so I'll never bet against that program and that coach, but it's going to be really tough, especially because of how good the league is this year.
Right now, Aaron, who'd you say you like in the league right now? If you had to pick a team, it's early. Again, we're not even in February. But if you like just the way the roster is constructed, the way the team's currently playing or could be currently playing, who do you like as a deep NCAA tournament team, a deep run from this conference?
I think there's no doubt. To me, it's Kentucky. And I picked Tennessee in the preseason to make the Final Four. So, listen, I absolutely think Tennessee has the capability to do it. And I thought, rallying on the road the way that they did the other night against Georgia, a game that we've obviously referenced 2 or 3 times, was really important. But I just bring it up because when I look at Kentucky, I mean, first of all, I think the thing that stands out to me about Kentucky, they're coming off a loss as we speak here to Texas A&M on the road. Okay, whatever. Everybody's going to lose on the road. We just discussed that. But there's 2 things that stand out to me about them. One, I do think there is a baseline offensive competency that you need to have success in March. In other words, these teams that want to grind out every game 62-59, you can't win 6 straight games like that in March. I mean, even the Virginia team that won a national championship, they were really good. They played a slow pace, but offensively they were really good where if you sped them up, they could score. By the way, my alma mater, UConn, Dan Hurley, he said it. He's like, for years, I valued defense and rebounding. And then I realized, you know what? I can coach defense. I can coach effort. I can't coach putting the ball in the basket. And really, when UConn made the leap, it was when he emphasized recruiting offense more in the offseason. And so I bring it up because Kentucky could put the ball in the basket as well as anybody. Dillingham's incredible. Shepard's incredible. DJ Wagner, etc. The other thing with Kentucky, I still think there's another level for them to get to because, 1, the defense hasn't been that good. 2, they have a 7-foot NBA talent that is not eligible yet that the staff keeps telling us will eventually get eligible. And if you watch that Texas A&M game on Saturday, it was really rim protection and rebounding, which really hurt them. And 3, there's a kid named Justin Edwards on that team that people were talking about as the potential number 1 overall pick in the next NBA draft. 6'8", small forward, kind of that new age NBA player, can play big, can play small, whatever. He hasn't played well yet. And this is a hallmark of Calipari's teams, is that some of the freshmen, it clicks right away, but some of the freshmen, it just takes a little bit longer to adjust to college basketball. But as long as you have them all geared up, as you said, February into mid-February into late February into March, that's what matters in this sport. And so I just feel like Kentucky might be the best team in the SEC right now. Now, Tennessee would have an argument, whatever. But I think they have several more levels to go to. And I just don't know of the good teams in college basketball right now. The UNCs, the Tennessees, the Purdues. I don't know. I think right now is kind of who they are. And I don't know that there's that much better for them to get. Whereas I think Kentucky, they can absolutely hit another gear or two. And I say that as a team that I think is ranked 6th or 7th in the polls right now as we speak.
Again, Aaron Torres from Fox Sports with us right here talking a little SEC hoops. Aaron, on your point right there with Kentucky, I agree. I think they have the highest upside in the league. A team I do like, we haven't talked about them yet. They have a very deep roster, not a big drop-off. You probably know I'm about to go to here. It's Bruce Pearl and his Auburn team. I think they're the deepest team in the league, not a big drop-off from them. What's your some quick thoughts on the Tigers so far?
Well, biggest thought is I was watching their game against USC about 3 weeks ago. Now, USC is not playing well at all, but they destroyed USC. And at the time, they were unranked. And I wanted to put out the tweet of, this is the most underranked, undervalued team in college basketball. And then, of course, they've won like 9 games in a row. And now everybody is like, oh, my God, we need to talk more about Auburn. And it's
all
like,
by double digits. Yeah, now everybody's talking Auburn. Yeah.
I'm like, damn, I wish I'd put out that tweet so I could look smart. And you know how I operate is that I'm not afraid when I say something right to just keep bringing it up, keep bringing it up, keep bringing it up. Now, I ignore the stuff that I get dead wrong, but that's neither here nor there. But no, I mean, yeah, ever since the out of conference, I've just sat there and said, like, what you just said, David, is I think probably the deepest team in America in terms of guys that can play, like that are dudes. And so, I hope to talk to Coach Pearl at some time this year, because I'm curious as to, in this NIL portal era, how you get 11, 12 guys to buy into roles. And again, it's a combination of guys that have been in the program like KD Johnson,
who had to take a step back. Like you said, buy into these roles where he's not playing as much. But again, he looks even more – he looks more comfortable than he's ever looked, honestly. Yeah.
And I think the cool thing too about Auburn is it shows that there are players everywhere. And in the new era, you just got to have your ear to the ground, because they have 5-star, Aiden Holloway, McDonald's All-American type talent. But then they have a D2 kid, and I'm blanking on the kid's name right now, who literally was playing D2 and is contributing on an SEC team.
Denver. Yeah.
Yes, correct. Yep. Denver Jones was at FIU last year, has been playing very well. Florida International, for people who don't know what FIU is. So, I mean, we're talking about low major, D2, high major prospect.
I even like the Chad Baker-Mazara kid.
Oh, I love you talk about a West Coast guy. So he was
San Diego State kid.
Yeah, he was really good at San Diego State like 2 years ago. Same exact role. Like a sixth man, just came in, got buckets, whatever. And then there was some issue there in the offseason. I'm not aware, and I certainly don't want to speculate. But just wasn't with the team last year, obviously, when they made their Final Four run. And then, he's in JUCO, and all of a sudden everyone's recruiting him. And as soon as Auburn got that guy, I'm like, that guy's really good. Now, again, you start looking at their roster, you see all the players that they have, and you start to sit there and say, okay, I don't know what the role is going to be, but he is doing exactly what you need him to do, which is get buckets for you off the bench in a 5th, 6th man role. So no, I'm with you. I know I said Kentucky. I don't know if you asked me who's the favorite or who do I like the most, but I think those.
I would agree with you with Kentucky.
Yeah, I think those 3, Kentucky, Auburn, and Tennessee in some order, are going to finish 1, 2, and 3. Alabama's right there. I give Alabama credit. Nate Oates, the schedule, like if you look at the schedule, they lost a lot of games early, but it was still really good teams at Creighton, Arizona in the state of Arizona, Purdue in Canada in a game where the refereeing was not great, but neither here nor there. Like their losses were all legit, And I think it's made them tougher for SEC play. Now they've played at Mississippi State, at Vandy, and then South Carolina at home. Yeah, so they have tougher games ahead. But
they got two tough ones coming up. They got at Tennessee Saturday, then Auburn comes to Tuscaloosa a week from Wednesday.
There you go. Yeah, so we'll see on them. I don't want to dismiss them. I don't want to dismiss. You know who I actually really like, even though the win-loss record won't reflect it? I like Florida actually a lot. I mean,
I'm with you there. I tell my buddies that they're a deep team too, and they got a lot of scores.
Deep team, and that's exactly it. You have to regular season, it's not so much. You have to, in the tournament, have guys that can get buckets because, again, you can't win every game 62-58. The guards are good. They rebound really well. I give credit to Todd Golden. I've been critical of him even before the hire, but I think he's done a good job with that roster. Again, as we speak here, they're 1-2 in SEC play, going to Tennessee on Tuesday. They could be 1-3, but I don't think it changes the fact that they're still a really good team.
Aaron, 2 quick questions, and we'll get you out of here again. Appreciate you joining us, brother. Before I ask you how many bids you think the SEC gets this year as we stand right now, give me your thoughts on the job Chris Beard's done in Oxford so far this year.
Well, he's really good. And like the whole thing is, and I always say this, and it's obvious, where I'm going to go with this, is 2 things can be true is, the situation at Texas that led to his firing was really bad last year. I'm not going to deny it. I'm not going to hide it. I'm not going to pretend. And frankly, I'll be honest, something I whiffed on is I thought he wasn't getting back into coaching for a long time. And I thought it would be at the low major level, kind of like a Rick Pitino going to Iona and then up to St. John's, or a Hugh Freeze going to Liberty and then going to Auburn, Will Wade at McNeese State. So I just bring it up because I didn't think he was going to be back in the Power 5 level. But what I also said in the preseason is like, the thing about him, not only is he a good coach, he did it. Texas was literally the number 1 ranked team in the country a year ago, and sometimes these guys go through scandal and they're 4, 5, 6 years removed. And it's like, well, he was really good back in the day, but now that he's getting that second shot, how good is he going to be? And it's like, that was last year. That was in the portal era. That was in the NIL era. That was in the collective era. So it's not like, whatever. He was out of basketball for 4 or 5 years and he went to the NBA for 2 years and now he's back and he's got to try to figure it out. It's like he was doing it in this era. So I knew he'd be good, but 15-1, man, that's next level. And obviously, look, the out-of-conference resume isn't super strong except for the win against Memphis, but I would also sit there and say, like, you sit there at 15-1 right now, 2-1 in SEC play, even without a great out-of-conference resume. I mean, I think you're talking about, 9-9, 7-8 seed in the SEC is probably getting you in the NCAA tournament. And obviously you get in the NCAA tournament that exceeds all logical expectations. Now, I think what's interesting about him, it's hard to get any real knowledge of what his contract looks like. And I only say that because if Louisville opens up, I think he's going to be a premier candidate. If Louisville poaches somebody else from a big spot, I think Chris Beard could be a candidate there. And so I'm just curious, is this a one-off get back in and get out situation at Ole Miss? And for any Ole Miss fan listening, I'm not rooting for it. I don't really care where Chris Beard coaches. He's a great coach. But I'm curious, is it that kind of deal, or was the administration smart enough to say, hey, we're going to lock you into a contract with a huge buyout where you can't get out of this thing for 2 or 3 years? That part I do not know, but I just bring it up to say what he's done is unbelievable. I expect him to be in the tournament. And then again, if you can keep him beyond this year, then that's something you can really build on going forward.
And AT, before we get you out of here, last question, put you on the spot. As we stand on January 15th today, how many teams do you think get into the NCAA tournament from the SEC?
Yeah, it's so hard. I see the thing with me, Dave, and people always ask me this, whatever school that they root for or conference that they root for, I'm just not a big, it's hard for me to get fired up breaking down net rankings in January and February. It's kind of like, you get to mid-February and you kind of see how the brackets are, the Joe Lunardi and the Jerry Palm brackets are, and then you kind of figure things out. I think it's too early. I said in the preseason, I thought there'd be 8. Now, I did include, which would tie the record. I did include Arkansas in that mix. That is, I don't think is going to happen. But the ones that I feel really good about right now, just looking, I think Auburn, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, the ones that we talked about, those 4 I feel really good about. I feel really good about right now. I would say I feel pretty good about Florida, although again, they're struggling right now. I would say 6 to 7, a South Carolina, they don't have much of an out of conference resume. They're sitting there 2-1 in the league, but the wins at Missouri, Mississippi State at home. We'll see how much, as the schedule gets tougher, how they handle things. I do like Mississippi State. I'll say this. I think if we're talking about, I think the 2 Alabama schools get in. I think Tennessee and Kentucky get in. That's 4. I think both Mississippi schools get in. And Mississippi State right now, you kind of look at the resume, maybe not quite where Ole Miss is, but they got a lot of players, a lot of dudes. So that's already 6 right there. And then, whether it is a South Carolina, maybe a Georgia, a Florida. I think Florida, even though the win-loss record isn't amazing, I think they probably get in as well. So I would say 7 to 8. And I think those top 4 feel pretty locked in. And I would even say 5 with Ole Miss. I mean, I think it would take a pretty big collapse from Ole Miss not to get in. And then it gets interesting from there. And I'll just say this, and I know I'm rambling, but the one that's really intriguing to me is Texas A&M because preseason, so much hype, starts out okay, then they struggle. They have guys they thought were going to be there that aren't there. And I do wonder, one, you lost to a very good Auburn team early in the league play, but you beat Kentucky. Is that any sort of kind of stepping stone kind of thing for you? You're playing Arkansas on Tuesday night on the road. That's obviously with the way Arkansas is playing. That's a game that's a must-win game for either team.
Feels like you need it.
Yeah. So like A&M, I think has the dudes. I mean, if you watch the A&M Kentucky game, Wade Taylor and Boots Radford are as good as any backcourt. Including Kentucky in the SEC, as good of a 1-2 punch anyway in the backcourt. It's just a question of can they make up for some struggles out of the gate here to start the season.
Well, AT, it's always a pleasure, brother. I appreciate you. And anybody listening, go give him a follow. Go check him out on the Aaron Torres podcast. Does a phenomenal job for Fox Sports. Aaron, I appreciate you taking the time, brother, and coming on with us tonight.
David, it was my pleasure, man. Always glad to do it. Appreciate it. We'll talk soon, okay?
Later, brother.
Later.
Again, Aaron Torres joining us tonight. Does a phenomenal job covering really all sports. I was listening to him today. He was talking about the Cowboys. Maybe they hired Bill Belichick. But again, talked a little SEC basketball, his thoughts on the Kalen DeBoer hire, how he will fit in the Southeast, because Aaron saw it from a pretty close view out there being in Pac-12 country. But transition over before we get you out of here. Let's talk a little SEC basketball. Aaron said he wasn't a fan of the net rankings. We're going to give it to you, though, real quick. Currently, Alabama sits in at number 5. They lead the SEC in net rankings. Tennessee comes in at 6th. Auburn 8th. Kentucky 18th. Mississippi State 33rd. Texas A&M 42nd. Florida 48th. South Carolina 54th. Ole Miss 57th. Georgia 83rd. LSU 95th. We talked to Arkansas sitting there at 113. Missouri 117. Vanderbilt 251. Again, wanted to show you some of those SEC standings as we sit in there right now. Again, Alabama, Auburn sitting there at 3-0. Ole Miss, South Carolina, Kentucky, Tennessee, Georgia, LSU, all 2-1 so far. And then we got Mississippi State, Florida, Texas A&M sitting there at 1-2. And then we got the cellar dwellers sitting there at the bottom, Arkansas, Missouri, and Vandy, all sitting there at 0-3 on the season right now. And let's briefly cover, before we get you out of here, the Saturday slate that was in the SEC. I think we had 3 really good games. You had 2 in overtime. I mentioned it. You had the A&M Kentucky game. You had the Missouri South Carolina game. And you had the Alabama Mississippi State game in Starkville go down to the wire. Let's pull up the schedule, the results, courtesy of the SEC Network. Like I mentioned, Tennessee, Georgia, Tennessee getting the 85-79 win. I think this is a massive opportunity that Georgia let slip away. I think this was a game they could have won them. They were up with about 5-6 minutes left. This is a game they could have had, but again, Tennessee, gritty team, veteran guys. Zakai Ziegler kind of coming into his own. Early in the game, felt like Tennessee was turning it over, making dumb mistakes. First half felt like Tennessee could have been up 15, kind of ran away and hid. Georgia could have cut it to 5, but the beginning of the second half, Georgia kind of dominated the second half. They let Tennessee creep back in it. Dalton connect with some big shots. It's a game Mike White and the boys, if they just missed the NCAA tournament, could circle and kind of be like, kind of let one get away there. Ole Miss moved to 2-1 in league play, getting a 69-56 home win against Vanderbilt. As you can tell, after Jerry Stackhouse real upset, said this is the best team money could buy. Kind of taking a shot at Ole Miss. Seems real frustrated. Don't really blame him. I think Stack could get a job in the NBA right now if he wanted to. Just doesn't feel like a good. This kind of seems like this is the last year for Jerry Stackhouse in Nashville. I hate saying that, but it just kind of seems like he's tired of it, fatigued of it. His players get poached. He really can't go dabble in the transfer portal too much because he doesn't have a ton to offer. But Ole Miss, Chris Beard getting a big win. Those are the games Chris Beard cannot afford to lose. They don't necessarily have to go win at Kentucky. Don't have to go win at Auburn. They just can't lose games like Vanderbilt. Ole Miss really controlled this one from the jump. Ole Miss gets the win, moves to 2-1. We mentioned it, one of the overtime games, Texas A&M. I think this is the game of the year so far in the SEC. I mean, there was only 3, but it was one of the bigger games in college basketball on Saturday. A&M get the 97-92 overtime win. Some questionable calls at the end. Kentucky, I mean, I hadn't seen an offensive foul called on the one like they had Boots Radford shooting a 3 where he put his leg out, got fouled, and they called an offensive foul. And then at the end, Reed Shepherd, give him credit, getting a rebound, getting fouled. His time expired, made his 2 free throws. Some argued should they got Reed Shepherd more involved in overtime. But Rob Dillingham made 3-4-3, I think maybe it was at 4, but he definitely made 3 threes in a row. He was hot, so I understand why they were giving it to him. Kentucky, I agree with Aaron Torres. Highest ceiling in the league. When they're playing their best, they have the most talent. It's just a young team. They don't know what they don't know. I'm fired up to see how Cal keeps this team rolling. I wouldn't discourage this loss. Like Aaron Torres, like AT said, this league rolls about 10, 12 deep. Any road game in this league is going to be tough. I was actually impressed with this young Cat team going to Reed Arena in College Station, competing, having a chance to win at the end. Got some breaks with some calls, but still, basketball, guys, is sitting football for people that follow football hard. A loss in basketball does not count the same as it does in football. I was impressed with both teams here. A&M needed it. Again, A&M at home, when Boots Radford and Wade Taylor are playing well, is as good as it is in the league. Again, also throwing Henry Coleman gets a bunch of second-chance baskets. That was a fun basketball game to watch, but A&M gets the 97-92 win. Another overtime win by Cooper, I believe. The Cooper kid for South Carolina. South Carolina get the 71-69 overtime win. Hit a 3 in regulation to send it into overtime. Missouri had a shot. Noah Carter, they missed it. Missouri just keeps losing these close games. They're 0-3. They need a league win. They'll have a chance this week. But South Carolina sit there at 2-1 in league play. Their only loss was to a 30-point loss in Tuscaloosa at Alabama. But they're sitting fine. Again, like AT said, they don't really have some big-notch win that could hang their hat on. Had a close loss at Clemson in non-conference play. But they just need to keep chipping away. They don't need to lose games if they do. Again, similar to Ole Miss. They don't have the Memphis win Ole Miss has, but they don't need to have a bad loss to either like Vandy or Missouri. But they didn't. Vanderbilt, South Carolina getting a massive road win against Missouri on Saturday. Florida getting the 90-68 win against Arkansas. This was Arkansas's 3rd straight double-digit loss in conference. Again, I said it on last Thursday shows. I'm done with Arkansas. They're not making the tournament. Too far gone. 113 in net ranking right now. Too far gone. Florida. I like Florida more than some teams. I'm in a group message with some of my college buddies. They give me hell for thinking Florida's going to make the tournament. It's a deep team that can score a lot. Are they great offensively or defensively? No. But Riley Kugel, Walter Clayton, they got some guys that can go score. They're bucket getters. They can go get buckets. Florida's just a better team. Arkansas just has no passion, no fight right now. Not a shocking performance there. Auburn getting a 93-78 win over LSU. They were up majority double digits in the second half against LSU. LSU came back a little late. LSU was 2-0, undefeated rolling into that game. Currently dropped to 2-1. Matt McMahon's team's playing better. Jalen Cook, the point guard that was at LSU, transferred to Tulane, back at LSU. He's the straw that stirs the drink for LSU right now. They're a much improved team with him. Auburn, I think the deepest team in college basketball right now. They don't have the dude or the upside of the team 2 years ago with Jabari Smith and Walker Kessler, but they roll deep. We mentioned it. Denver Jones, Chaz Baker, Mazzaro, Katie Johnson coming off the bench is an energy bug. You know, I'm a guy who was real critical on Katie Johnson, their guard play last year, but he's really embraced their role. Janai Broom, I think he's right after Mark Sears in that SEC Player of the Year talk right now. He's having a phenomenal year. I think Auburn's a legit second weekend team for sure in the NCAA tournament right now, getting a big home win against LSU. And then finally, the last third close game of the weekend. Alabama getting a big road win, 82-74 against a tough Mississippi State team that was just coming off a big home win against Tennessee. This was honestly a very impressive win by Nate Oates and this team. They did it defensively. Give Grant Nelson, who I've been hard on, I think he plays a little soft at times, but he held Tolu Smith in check. I think Alabama's tempo got to Tolu Smith. He looked a little tired at the end. But Alabama, they're going to get their points. They're going to score in the 80s most nights. And like I said, I was telling my buddies, like Aaron Torres was saying, Alabama took their lumps. They have 5 losses in non-conference play to, like we mentioned, to Arizona, Purdue, and Creighton, and throwing the Clemson and Ohio State losses. Not bad losses. Alabama didn't have a bad loss. But I think they learned from a lot of those games. They schedule tough, just like Nate Oates does every year. Again, they're always going to get theirs offensively. The key will be defense. Ever since they stopped switching, ever since they started switching on the ball screens, they've gotten better. Defensively, Grant Nelson held his own, like I said, against Tolu Smith. This was a tough, gutsy win at Mississippi State at Humphrey Coliseum, the Hump, on a Saturday night after them coming off a big win against Tennessee. Mississippi State was. That was a big, tough win for Alabama. Got to give it looked rough early. Mississippi State was attacking the rim, getting after them. But guys like Muhammad Wagee coming back from injury, Nick Pringle getting better defensively as well, not leaving his feet on shot fakes as much. I like what Alabama's doing. They're slowly creeping up. Don't be shy. I think Alabama's going to be anywhere from that 4 to 6 seed in the NCAA tournament. I think they'll finish in the top 4. Great win. Mississippi State, there's not a tougher 4-game stretch to start conference play than they had. They at South Carolina is a tournament team right now. Tennessee at home, they won. Alabama, top 4 to 6 team seed in the tournament right now. And they go at Kentucky this week. It's a tough 4-game stretch. If they could go 2-2, you'd be dancing in the streets in the district if you're in Starkville. It would look like it's probably a 1-3 start, but they had to get that Tennessee when they did. Tolu Smith getting his feet underneath him. You could tell it was a little winded towards the end of that game. But again, Chris Jans' team's fine. Thought they abandoned attack at Alabama, getting them some foul trouble probably a little earlier. But Josh Hubbard, one of their better scorers now, took some shots. Wasn't that great from beyond the arc. Thought they could have, like I said, attacked Bama's front court big guys, got them in a more foul trouble early like they did at the beginning of the game. But they abandoned it. But let's preview the week that is before we get you out of here. Starting tomorrow, they push that game up 5 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Central Standard Time Zone, Florida at Tennessee. You heard Chris Lowe. He's in Knoxville. A lot of snow. So they pushed that tip-off up on ESPN. It would be a big win for Florida here. Tennessee needs it because Alabama comes to town on Saturday. Tennessee needs to go at least 1-1 this week. And Tennessee's as tough to beat at home as anybody in the country. Both those games at Thompson-Boling Arena this week. Florida, big opportunity for Todd Golden. This would be, again, his best win in his tenure at Florida. It's only midway through his second year. But again, I thought it would be that Kentucky game at home. He's still waiting to get that. Do they get it tomorrow? I don't know. It'll be interesting. It'll be an interesting crowd, too, because it's an early start. I like Tennessee in this one at home, as always I do at Thompson-Boling Arena. Missouri at Alabama, 6 p.m. Central Standard Time Zone tip on the SEC Network. Alabama should get this win. I mean, Missouri's not as bad as their record says, but Alabama at home should get this win before a tough trip to Knoxville. Then an 8 p.m. Central Standard Time tip, Georgia at South Carolina on ESPNU. It's a big game for both teams here. Georgia would like to go get this one to stay in that contention of the SEC, of one of those 7-8 bids. I'm lit with Aaron. They're not going to get 9. It's going to be closer to 7 to 8. This would be a big win, big opportunity. This isn't a nationally talked about game, but big opportunity for both teams. If you're South Carolina, you don't want to lose to a team like Georgia at home. You want to get this one. And Lamont Paris and the boys play a little sloppy at times. BJ Mack still trying to transition the league a little bit offensively. Michi Johnson, they can make some dumb mistakes at times. In this game, though, give me South Carolina at home. I'll take South Carolina at home here. And then the last game, the 8 p.m. Central Standard Time tip, Texas A&M at Arkansas on the SEC Network. Me and Aaron talked about this one. A&M needs this one. I mean, so does Arkansas. Arkansas is just looking for a conference win. A&M got the big home win against Kentucky. This is a game. I know it's Arkansas. It's at Bud Walton Arena. This isn't some great Arkansas team. They're going to miss the tournament. Like I said, Buzz Williams and the boys need to step up and get this game. If Wade Taylor and Bruce Radford aren't playing well, though, A&M could lose to anybody. Because if they're missing shots, they're just banking on Henry Coleman to get second chance buckets. If anybody in the chat can tell me where Julius Marble is this year, I know it's probably some academic thing. It looks like he's out for the year, but he's another big guy that could help him. That just came to my mind. He'd been missing the whole season. But again, a big opportunity here for both teams here. I still think Arkansas is just a checked out team. I'm going to go with A&M. A&M, I feel like they are going to go put their foot on Arkansas's throat here. Arkansas is not a tournament team. It's just there's no toughness on this team right now. And I know Eric Musselman's not watching this show. But again, I challenge you. You got your master motivator. Where is this? This is a team that's just totally checked out. I was watching the Auburn game last weekend. They're laughing down 30 at home in Bud Walton's biggest loss in Bud Walton Arena. It's embarrassing what Arkansas is doing right now. I don't think it changes. I'm not going to pick against Arkansas unless they're playing Vandy at home at this point. But then Wednesday's action. I got 3 more slates there. Mississippi State at Kentucky, 6 p.m. Central Standard Time Zone on ESPN 2. It's going to be a tough one for Mississippi State. Like I mentioned, toughest 4-game slate of anybody at Kentucky. Kentucky's going to be hungry after coming off a loss to Texas A&M as well. Give me the Cats here. Again, though, sometimes Kentucky doesn't play great defensively. They can play well for Mississippi State. Mississippi State can make it a sloppy, sluggish game. Just Tolu, he's got to get his conditioning back. You can tell, like I said, was slow towards the end of the second half, getting his feet underneath him. Give me Kentucky at Rupp. And then 6 p.m. Central Standard Time Zone, Ole Miss at LSU here. This is one of those games that could be sneaky for old Chris Beard and the boys. They got back-to-back road trips this week at LSU, at Auburn on Saturday. They're ranked in the top 25. Something tells me LSU wins this game. This is going to be the upset of the midweek. All my Ole Miss buddies are like, you hate us. No. I mean, Ole Miss is a top 5 team in the power rankings right now. And I'll reveal that tomorrow. Give you a little sneak preview right there. I think this is the game they sneak up because they're looking ahead to that Auburn matchup where it's like, man, we could really go get our big win of the season outside that Memphis run because no one goes really and wins at Neville Arena. They don't. I can see them looking ahead a little bit. Remember, LSU 2-1. They've been a lot better since Jalen Cooks got eligible. He's the straw that stirs that LSU drink right now. They're better. They're an overall better team right now. Give me LSU at the PMAC, getting the win. Give me that. And then finally, the 8 p.m. Central Standard Time Zone tip, Auburn at Vanderbilt at Memorial. Yeah, it's always a weird place to play. Auburn's going to get a win. They lost last year there, but this isn't the same Vanderbilt team. Stackhouse seems real frustrated. His team's starting to check out a little bit. They go as far as Mannion takes them and Tyron Lawrence takes them. But again, Auburn, deepest team in college basketball right now. Again, don't have a lot of dudes. They got Janai Broom is up for SEC Player of the Year. Again, probably right behind Mark Sears. But Auburn, deepest team, they should have no problem winning this game at Memorial. But that is the midweek slate in basketball right now. We had a great show, guys. We went a little over. We had an hour and 26 minutes. We went 86 minutes, guys. But a fantastic show. We had Chris Lowe from ESPN joining us. Talk a little Kalen DeBoer, that transition. We talked to Auburn coaching staff. Hugh Freeze going to have to go hire a bunch of different people. LSU, who they're going to hire to OC, is it Tommy Reese? Sounds like he's going to have some other opportunities. We got Aaron Torres. Talked about what he thought of Kalen DeBoer out there. He's in Pac-12 country or new Big Ten country, how his transition to the Southeast at Alabama will be. We talked SEC hoops. Aaron thinks it's going to be a 7-8 bid team league. And then I previewed this week's SEC slate. And also going back to the football standpoint, we talked how Missouri needs to capitalize springboard off their Cotton Bowl 11-win season heading into the 24 season. Again, we'll bring you another show on Thursday. We'll review all the Tuesday, Wednesday night matchups in SEC basketball, along with previewing Saturday's matchups. But again, guys, as always, like, subscribe, go tell us, rate, review how we can get better. But again, appreciate you joining us on this episode of Mock 10 Sports. You have a fantastic week.